President just referred to. The systemic racism is a stain on our nation's soul. The knee on the neck of justice for Black Americans. Profound fear and trauma. The pain, the exhaustion that Black and brown Americans experience every single day.
So while the tone may be different from the previous administration, the politics around police reform in this country have not really changed too much, Lindsay. The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act that was passed in the House, only one Republican supported it when it was passed in the House. Right now, it is deadlocked in the Senate. Tonight, we are learning of bipartisan talks. Senator Tim Scott, Senator Cory Booker, 2 out of the 3 Black senators are trying to come together to figure out if there is a pathway forward for police reform in this country. But tonight, there's also frustration with even the White House. President Joe Biden, he abandoned the idea of creating a police oversight commission after talking to civil rights leaders. There's questions on whether or not he can be doing more rather than just expressing support for legislation. So here in front of Black Lives Matter Plaza, you have activists, you have supporters, you have protesters gathering here. While they are exhaling tonight, they're also taking another deep breath in. They're holding their breath and they're asking themselves, when will the policies of this nation reflect the words that are painted on this very street, the words that Black Lives Matter, Lindsay?
And meanwhile, I can't help but notice the party-like festive atmosphere. Some people were literally just dancing in the streets just over your shoulders there, Rachel. I want to bring it back to President Biden again, because he did weigh in earlier today, even before the verdict was reached. And he also spoke with the Floyd family after the verdict. Talk about those moments.
He did. He spoke to George Floyd's family just yesterday. President Joe Biden said he wanted to wait until the jury was sequestered to do so. He said he wasn't really planning on sharing it, but George Floyd's brother shared the fact that he called him to express his remorse for the death of George Floyd. His brother said that he knew what it was like. He felt like the president knew what it was like to lose someone. Obviously, President Joe Biden has dealt with loss in his family as well. But again, this is something that deeply affected President Joe Biden. And he said today, just before the verdict was read, hours before the verdict was read, that he hopes that the jury reaches the right decision. And clearly today, he believes that justice was served by that guilty verdict. But again, the question of whether or not there is going to be more change. And so today, President Biden reiterating what we've heard from a lot of Black Americans so far, that real change, real justice is not going to just come from one verdict, that it's much larger than that it's going to come from actual legislative change. Lindsay?
All right, Rachel Stott, our thanks to you. And we are joined now by Senator Tina Smith of Minnesota. Senator, thank you so much for joining us. First, just tell me your personal reaction as you heard the verdict read this afternoon.
Thank you, Lindsay. You know, I think that my reaction was so similar to people all across Minnesota and all across this country. I used to work in City Hall, so I was frequently in that big plaza, right where all those folks were gathered waiting to hear the verdict. And there's this sort of palpable sense of, you know, I want to trust that this system is going to deliver justice, but I'm so fearful that it won't. So, of course, there was a huge sigh of kind of exhale and breath released when we heard that former police officer Derek Chauvin was going to be is convicted on all 3 charges. But then immediately you start to think about how this is, as Vice President Harris says, this is a measure of justice, but it is about accountability in one case. It is not about addressing the systemic problems that we have with policing and public safety and criminal justice and the systemic racism that I was heartened to hear both Vice President Harris and President Biden speak about just a moment ago.
And of course, it's been nearly a year since George Floyd's death. What does this guilty verdict mean for both the state of Minnesota and for the country?
Well, I think that it means that in this one case, we have accountability, but the question is, where are we going to take this this movement for social justice that was unleashed, that was sparked by this tragic murder, where are we going to take that spark? Where will it lead us? Will it lead us finally to a place in this country where we are truly not only seeing the systemic racism, but then we are prepared to take action to address it? And I know that that is the question on the minds of so many Minnesotans today. It's the question on my mind. We have the power to change the system, to change the laws that make it possible for George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Daunte Wright to be murdered in the face by law enforcement. This is the challenge that we have to confront. And I originally was an original co-sponsor of the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. I've introduced legislation to help spur innovation in reimagining what public safety can look like at the local level. These are the steps that we need to take in order to change the systems that end up resulting in too many Black and brown people, and too many Black men in particular, losing their lives.
I'd like to piggyback off of that, because as you just mentioned, you sponsored the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act in Congress to try to address police reform. Do you think that this verdict today can spur any momentum on that effort?
Well, you know, I am an optimist. I sometimes say that you can't really serve effectively in the United States Senate if you're not an optimist, if you don't believe that progress is possible. That's where I'm coming from. I was heartened today to see the statement of Senator Tim Scott, who I know cares.
The law demands that you make a fair decision based solely on the evidence, your individual evaluations of that evidence, your reason and common sense, and these instructions. When you return to the jury room to discuss this case, you must select a jury member to be foreperson. That person will lead your deliberations. In order for you to return a verdict, whether guilty or not guilty,
following Minneapolis Police Department policy,
He was just a pain the entire time. You will learn that on May 25th of 2020, Mr. Derek Chauvin betrayed this badge when he used excessive and unreasonable force upon the body of Mr. George Floyd.
And you will learn that Derek Chauvin did exactly what he had been trained to do over the course of his 19-year career. The use of force is not attractive, but it is a necessary component of policing.
Would you tell the ladies and gentlemen?
This be our community. Just because I'm black, they ain't gonna come to the call for it. They're gonna come and say that again. Justice for the rest of the family. Amen. Justice for the rest of the families. They need to reopen these cases and justice for the rest of these families. Because that's only one man's life. The rest of these 470, we want justice for them too.
And we want to up the charges for Daunte Wright's killing as well.
Yeah.
The fact that her charge is less than the cop that killed Justine is ridiculous. She needs the same charge. It's murder. She killed him. It's only fair. What's fair is fair.
Yeah. And we're not going for that fake ass white privileged white woman cry shit no more. She killed that boy in cold blood for no reason. There was a value on Justine's life that's not on Daunte's life. That's why she's held to a different standard than the man that killed Justine DeMond. And we're not settling for that standard no more.
Nope. It's over.
Over with.
Question for you. What happens if he's found guilty of all three charges? What are you going to call for then?
We're going to call for justice for the rest of the 470 murders that led up to George Floyd. We want justice for their families too, because that's only... Black lives matter. Black lives matter. Black lives matter. Black lives matter. Grace and peace, brothers and sisters. Grace.
How do you feel? Going to at least try and make some money.
Pass. She just wants to get in front.
You want us to hold one up here?
all, my name is Jaylani Hussein, Jaylani-Hussein. I'm the Executive Director for the Council on American Islamic Relations. And the first thing that I'm going to say is guilty, guilty, guilty. And I personally, deep down in my heart, in this moment, as a person who is fasting, believes that this victory came because the higher power stepped in. Because God stepped in. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. I want every single person who hears this message to know that today we got justice inside the courthouse. And now we are wanting justice outside the courthouse. If we get only justice inside the courthouse, but not outside the courthouse, then we have no answer for Dante Wright's mom, and we don't have no answer for many other families who are yet to be named because the system is still flawed. The system is still designed to kill black men. We don't need a court system to stop the brutality. We need policies to hold police accountable. And until we get that, we are only be able to get justice inside the courthouse after we lose a loved one, and we are not ready for that. Today, Minnesota, God chose us for this moment. We did not know it. We didn't choose this moment. But God chose us for this moment. And those 12 juries carried the burden of bringing justice. Many of us were uneasy about today. Many of us had a lot of anxiety, and that is because we live in a system where a black person can be killed and not have the same justice system if you are a white person who's killed. But today, on this street, on this court, we have said enough is enough. And we have gotten a white officer who killed a black man to be guilty as charged. And so today we celebrate, but we do not put all our hope into this guilty verdict, because there are many families who did not get this type of justice. There are 470 families in Minnesota alone since 2000, and thousands of families across this country who have never got the justice that we saw displayed here today. Families who asked and pleaded for help, never got the cameras that we have today. No justice, no peace that we got today. So today is an important day for all of us. But it's a day to hold a strong mirror in front of us. Because if you think only Derek Chauvin is guilty, I would remind you the Minneapolis Police Department is guilty. The city of Minneapolis is guilty. The state of Minnesota is guilty. This country is guilty. And that we say since the killing of George Floyd on 38th in Chicago. The world moved. The world saw the brutality, and they saw it at the comfort of their home in a time we could not move because of pandemic. I believe that we needed that moment. We needed that moment. We needed less distractions to see the brutality that we have allowed our tax dollars to create, our tax dollars to kill and punish. But today, on this day, we are moving forward. And I want to say this personally today. The thought that came into my mind when I held guilty, guilty, and guilty was George Floyd on his last day, on his last hours, standing inside Cup Foods, dancing. Dancing. And today, many people who are not born yet are dancing because we got a glimpse of justice. A glimpse of justice. But we have not got full justice until all of these families get justice. We don't have justice until we get the type of economic justice in this country. We don't have justice until we get educational justice for people of color in this country. But today, we are moving forward. And Minnesotans God chose us. Let's carry on this burden. Let's shine a little bit of a light, a North Star light for the rest of this country, that we shine a light of justice for this country, and we let this guilty verdict flow on the Mississippi River all the way down to Delta, to allow this country to taste what it's like for a little bit of victory. A little bit of victory. And with that I say, we thank God Almighty. We thank God Almighty. We thank God Almighty. But guess what? We are not done. Right. If you think we're going home, we're not going home. 3 more officers have killed George Floyd. We need justice from them. And Dante Wright was killed in the middle of this trial to show us that the justice system in this country and accountability has yet to be had. And we will demand justice by any means necessary.
One down, 3 to go.
One down, 3 to go. One down, 3 to go. One down.
This also impacts the laws surrounding police immunity and how they're treated when there are these levels of infractions. This is something that I think we'll see changes. I think it also brings change to law enforcement in and of itself. The ability for officers to stand together with one another, with other good officers, because we have plenty to say, these actions are wrong and I will not stand by it just because we share the same badge. I think that's going to be vitally important as we go forward, looking at these cases and the effects overall coming from this case.
Shauna Lloyd, we thank you so much for your time tonight, your insight throughout the trial.
Thank you, Lindsay.
And reaction is pouring in from across the country. Take a listen. Tonight, the crowd outside Cup Foods in Minneapolis erupting in cheers as they learned of Derek Chauvin's conviction in George Floyd's death. At the U.S. Capitol, members of the Congressional Black Caucus clasping hands as they listened to the verdict. The disturbing video of Chauvin with his knee on Floyd's neck as Floyd told officers he could not breathe stunned the world. The Memorial Day incident then inciting outrage with people from various races and backgrounds taking to the streets. In the nation's capital and across the country last summer, scenes of protesters face down in silence, remembering the 46-year-old father. The Black Lives Matter movement seeing a resurgence. And from Los Angeles to Phoenix, Orlando to New York City, demonstrators demanding justice for Floyd, but also for other African Americans who've died in police custody. At the Brooklyn Memorial Service, his brother Terrence telling our David Muir his family appreciated the diversity seen among demonstrators.
When you looked out into that crowd and you saw that sea of faces, black, white, Asian American, Latino, what did you make of it?
I just knew my brother was proud. Because I know the whole Floyd family was proud of that. Because we all standing together. We all standing together for the cause of justice.
In September of last year, that intersection near where Floyd was arrested, renamed George Floyd Square. And let's bring in ABC News contributor LZ Granderson. LZ, thanks so much for joining us. Been asking everybody the same question tonight. First, let me just get your reaction to the verdict.
You know, it's muted. It's muted because there was a video that literally had the murder caught on tape, on camera. And so it's very difficult to deny that 10-minute moment with George Floyd and former Officer Chauvin. But the reason why it's muted is because I'm also reminded of what the police department said that day, soon thereafter. What they said was George Floyd experienced a medical incident and that he died. When you go back and you read that initial statement, which is about 200 words, there is no mention of the witnesses who were asking Mr. Chauvin to remove his knee from Mr. Floyd's neck. There's no mention that Mr. Chauvin's knee was even on Mr. Floyd's neck. So my reaction is muted because I know how lucky we are to get here. We're lucky that that 17-year-old girl's phone had enough charge to capture that moment. We're lucky she went to the store that day. We're lucky she went to that store at that moment. What if she had decided to go earlier? We may not have had any of this. So it's muted because I have relief that there is a guilty charge, a guilty verdict, but I also remember what could have happened had that video not been captured.
And today you penned an op-ed in the LA Times where you said, quote, a guilty verdict in the Chauvin trial won't be enough for real progress. What does real progress look like to you?
Real progress is when we have an officer on trial without a video going viral, without protesters. Real progress is when the police is actually able to make sure that the bad officers get off of the force, get off of our streets before they get to a point in which they encounter a George Floyd. So real progress is actually the good police officers intervening to save George Floyd's life. When we get to that point in terms of law enforcement and the way we talk about criminal justice, then we'll see real progress, in my opinion.
And you also touch upon the important role cell phone videos have played in providing us a view into interactions with police. But despite all of that, you say this case energized a movement for police reform and justice that could no longer be silenced. But we did not arrive here by design. If anything, the design was to avoid this moment. How does this country go about having significant systemic change?
Well, first it starts with us on an interpersonal level. You know, many families will be discussing this case, will be discussing this trial and the events of it. I will add that this incident, that this day of May 2020 is still happening in the sense that we have other officers that need to also go through their court hearings and court proceedings in a trial. We also have to understand, you know, how exactly did that press release get out in the first place, considering the number of witnesses that were there who saw Derek Chauvin put his knee on George Floyd's neck, and yet there's no mention of any of that in the initial report or initial statement. So it first begins with an interpersonal sort of looking at what happened and how you feel about it. And then I would encourage people who are still confused, who are still upset, or worse yet, who think we can now move on, I would encourage you to do things to educate yourself. Read the new Jim Crow. Watch the 13th. Go out of your comfort zone to learn more about this, because it is imperative that you educate yourself so that when things like this occur again, you're not blindsided by the dynamics. You actually have information and have more experience in understanding what to look out for. So it begins at home. It begins with us interpersonally.
I know that you say your reaction is muted to the verdict. I'm curious if you feel hopeful at all about the potential for change in this moment.
Well, the one thing that I'm holding on to, even though I recognize that because of the video they had really no choice, seeing the good officers be willing to call out the actions of a bad officer. My hope, really my prayer, is that this becomes a trend, that this catches on, because then we can start talking about establishing trust between law enforcement and the communities in which they serve. But right now, as long as we still think it's us versus them, and again, when you look at that initial statement made by the police department, it feels very much like that. As long as it feels that way, it's difficult to establish trust. So my hope is that the parade of officers who are willing to come forward and say that it's not proper police conduct, they keep that energy, and that it catches fire, and that other police departments also have those moments. Because no one, not good cops, not citizens, no one wants to deal with this again. But the only way we can start to avoid it is by getting those Derek Chauvins out of the police departments.
LZ Granderson, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And when we come back, our continuing coverage of the verdict in the Derek Chauvin trial. Stay with us. We are standing by to speak with one of George Floyd's brothers and monitoring the reaction coming in across the country. We'll be right back.
With so much at stake, so much on the line, more Americans turn here than any other newscast. ABC News World News Tonight with David Muir.
We have made it through another week together.
America's #1 most watched newscast.
following Minneapolis Police Department policy.
He was just in pain the entire time. You will learn that on May 25th of 2020, Mr. Derek Chauvin betrayed this badge when he used excessive and unreasonable force upon the body of Mr. George Floyd.
And you will learn that Derek Chauvin did exactly what he had been trained to do over the course of his 19-year career. The use of force is not attractive, but it is a necessary component of policing.
Would you tell the ladies and gentlemen how your viewing, experiencing what happened to George Floyd has affected your life?
When I look at George Floyd, I look at my dad, I look at my brothers, I look at my cousins, my uncles, because they are all black. I have a black father, I have a black brother, I have black friends. And I look at that and I look at how that could have been one of them. It's been nights I stayed up apologizing and apologizing to George Floyd for not doing more and not physically interacting and not saving his life.
Clearly, when Mr. Floyd was no longer responsive and even motionless, to continue to apply that level of force to a person proned out, handcuffed behind their back, that in no way, shape, or form is anything that is by policy. It is not part of our training, and it is certainly not part of our ethics or our values.
What today remains your opinion as to the cause of death for Mr. Floyd?
So my opinion remains unchanged. It's what I put on the death certificate last June. That's cardiopulmonary arrest complicating law enforcement subdual restraint and neck compression. That was my top line then. It would stay my top line now.
He would always be up on our mom. He was a big mama's boy. I cry a lot, but George, he loved his mom. He will always just be up on her. And, you know, every mother loves all of her kids, but it was so unique how they were with each other. He would just lay up on her in the fetus position like he was still in a womb.
I felt that Derek Chauvin was justified and was acting with objective reasonableness, following Minneapolis Police Department policy and current standards of law enforcement in his interactions with Mr. Floyd.
He would have the toxicology, the fentanyl and methamphetamine. There is exposure to a vehicle exhaust, so potentially carbon monoxide poisoning, or at least an effect from increased carbon monoxide in his bloodstream, and paraganglionoma, or the other natural disease process that he has. So all of those combined to cause Mr. Floyd's death.
Have you made a decision today whether you intend to testify or whether you intend to invoke your Fifth Amendment privilege?
I will invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege today.
The defendant has the right not to testify.
Your Honor, at this time, the defense rests.
Thank you. Mr. Black.
Your Honor, the state of Minnesota rests.
Mr. Nelson, anything further? All right. We probably put
following Minneapolis Police Department policy.
He was just in pain the entire time.
You will learn that on May
160 in a situation where he was confronted by police and had ingested drugs.
May have some aggression.
Challenge and be productive. That's what I got to say on that. Because I can't change what you feel. If you feel that, that's what you feel. But I could tell you to change it, channel it a different way.
Lastly, we've heard so much about your brother being a mama's boy, gentle giant, big Floyd. How would you hope that people remember him?
Just as that. Gentle giant. They're going to remember him as Floyd, gentle giant. Me and my family, we're going to remember him as Perry. Because remember him as Perry, from my experience, is remembering my father. Because my brother was my father's namesake, George Perry Floyd Sr. So I'm going to remember him, Perry, my brother. You did it, man. We did it. I'm proud of you. I'm going to miss you, but I'm proud of you.
And as Gianna said, do you feel that your brother's changed the world?
Of course, of course. And it's history because as people seen, you had Reverend Al Sharpton and you had Reverend Jesse Jackson, and they've been fighting for equality and against police brutality for years. For this moment, for them to be still here to witness this monumental moment, yeah, he changed. He definitely changed the world.
Terrence Floyd, so appreciate your time and talking with us tonight.
I appreciate you having me.
Thank you.
All right.
Stay with us for much more coverage of the verdict and the aftermath straight ahead.
I know what happened, and I'm not guilty.
Why the fascination with criminal trials? Figure out what's really out there.
She revealed she had murdered his family.
I know in my heart they did this.
You were told, for example, that Mr. Floyd died because his heart was too big. You heard that testimony. And now, having seen all the evidence, having heard all the evidence, you know the truth. And the truth of the matter is that the reason George Floyd is dead is because Mr. Chauvin's heart was too small.
He betrayed the badge and everything it stood for. It's not how they're trained. It's not following the rules. This is not an anti-police prosecution. It's a pro-police prosecution. You saw the photo. You saw the body language. You can learn a lot about someone by looking at their body language. The defendant facing down that crowd. They were pointing cameras at him, recording him, telling him what to do, challenging his authority, his ego, his pride. Not the kind of pride that makes you do better, be better. The kind of ego-based pride. But the defendant was not going to be told what to do. He was not going to let these bystanders tell him what to do. He was going to do what he wanted, how he wanted, for as long as he wanted. And there was nothing they could do about it because he had the authority. He had the power of the badge and the other officers. And the bystanders were powerless. They were powerless to do a thing. The defendant, he chose pride over policing. Make no mistake, this is not a prosecution of the police. It is a prosecution of the defendant. And there's nothing worse for good police than a bad police who doesn't follow the rules, who doesn't follow procedure, who doesn't follow training, who ignores the policies of the department, the motto of the department. to protect with courage, to serve with compassion. He didn't follow training, those hundreds of hours of training that he had. He did not follow the department's use of force rules. He did not perform CPR. He knew better. He just didn't do better. You heard the trainer, Lieutenant Mercil. We don't train this. This is not who we are. What the defendant did was not policing. What the defendant did was an assault.
The standard is not what should the officer have done in these circumstances. It's not what could the officer have done differently in these circumstances. The standard is what were the facts that were known to this officer at the precise moment he used force, and considering all of the totality of circumstances and facts known to the officer, what would a reasonable police officer have done? This is a dynamic and ever-changing, just like life. Things change. It's a dynamic situation. It's fluid. They take into account their experience with the subject at the beginning, the middle, the end. A reasonable police officer tries to predict or is at least cognizant and concerned about future behavior based upon past behavior. But the unpredictability of humans factors into the reasonable police officer's analysis too. Because sometimes reasonable police officers take someone into custody with no problem, and suddenly they become a problem. It can change in an instant. The state has really focused on the 9 minutes and 29 seconds. 9 minutes, 29 seconds. 9 minutes, 29 seconds. It's not the proper analysis, because the 9 minutes and 29 seconds ignores the previous 16 minutes and 59 seconds. It completely disregards it. It says, in that moment, at that point, nothing else that happened before should be taken into consideration by a reasonable police officer. It tries to reframe the issue of what a reasonable police officer would do. A reasonable police officer would, in fact, take into consideration the previous 16 minutes and 59 seconds. Their experience with the subject, the struggle that they had, the comparison of the words to actions.
In your gut, it's what you now know in your heart. This wasn't policing. This was murder.
The teenager who shot that video, Darnella Frazier, taking the stand, testifying off camera. Like so many eyewitnesses, she's still haunted by what she saw.
When I look at George Floyd, I look at my dad, I look at my brothers, I look at my cousins, my uncles, because they are all black. I look at how that could have been one of them. It's been nights. I stayed up apologizing and apologizing to George Floyd for not doing more.
Swear or affirm? A dozen law enforcement witnesses, including the Minneapolis chief of police, testified against Derek Chauvin.
To continue to apply that level of force to a person proned out, handcuffed behind their back, that in no way, shape, or form is anything that is by policy, is not part of our training, and it is certainly not part of our ethics or our values.
The prosecution's medical experts were blunt.
A healthy person subjected to what Mr. Floyd was subjected to would have died as a result of what he was subjected to.
Chauvin opting not to take the stand in his own defense.
I will invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege today.
His attorney calling just 7 witnesses to the prosecution's 38. They sought to convince jurors that George Floyd's heart disease and drug use led to his death, not Chauvin's knee on his neck.
Derek Chauvin did exactly what he had been trained to do over the course of his 19-year career. The use of force is not attractive, but it is a necessary component of policing.
But the jury was not convinced, and tonight we have their judgment. What Derek Chauvin did to George Floyd wasn't policing, it was murder. The former officer put in handcuffs himself as he was let out of court.
Our thanks to Alex, and for more on this guilty verdict, we're joined by ABC News contributor Brian Buckmeyer, host of the Law and Crime Network. Thanks so much for joining us in person here, Brian. So I've been asking everybody the same question. Was this the reaction, the verdict that you were expecting?
Kind of yes and no. The lawyer in me expected it. The lawyer in me knows the laws, the facts, how it all fit. But the man inside of me was skeptical because we've been here before where there was an officer who we expected to be convicted but didn't. So there was a bit of reservation, but when the verdict came out, it fit what my mind and my legal expertise expected.
You and I were discussing this earlier. You talked about how there was a lot of paperwork. What do you think was the difficult aspect, and were you surprised that it took just over 10 hours to come to the verdict?
Yeah, there was a lot for the jury to dig into, and when we were talking about this, we talked about the fact that no one goes to jury school to understand how the facts and the law should come together, the terminology, substantial force, intervening factor, and so for that, I thought it might take some time, and so I was a little bit surprised that we're here today talking about a verdict. I would have expected tomorrow or maybe even the day after.
And there were more than a dozen complaints against Derek Chauvin. The prosecution was very clear at the outset to say that this is not the state versus police. But do you think that, does the Minneapolis Police Department get a pass here as far as continuing to keep him on despite all of these articles against him?
So I think the prosecution did a smart and strategic job of kind of parsing through what they wanted to argue and what they didn't want to take on. Taking on the entire Minneapolis Police Department is a hard task to do. So they made it very narrow and only took on Derek Chauvin. But I don't think this gives them a pass. And it's something that Eric Nelson said, that the reasonable officer wouldn't do this in broad daylight. The reasonable officer wouldn't do this with so many cameras on them. But Derek Chauvin did that. And I think he did that because he believed he could get away from this. He could get away from doing this to George Floyd, and I think that's what we really have to attack. Why did Derek Chauvin believe he could do this in broad daylight with so many witnesses, so many cameras? That's the systemic racism. That's the systemic problem that needs to be addressed.
History shows, though, that it is difficult to charge and convict police officers. Do you feel in any way that this case changes that?
I think it does change to some degree because now we have a model. Now we have an example that we can point to and say, this is egregious police brutality that we will convict of a top count, not just manslaughter, but murder. And I think that's going to help prosecutors, find the roadmap to getting that conviction. I think it's very similar to what we saw with Harvey Weinstein, where it was hard to get someone convicted of a crime if an individual didn't report right away. Now there's a roadmap. Now there's an understanding. This is criminal. This is not. And this will get you convicted for murder. Brian Buckmeyer,
it's been a privilege to have you holding our hands along throughout this entire trial. We appreciate it. And now we're going to go to correspondent Rachel Scott, who is once again at Black Lives Matter Plaza in Washington, D.C. Rachel.
Hey, Lindsay, you know, we were out here as that verdict was being read in the courtroom today, and I remember watching it on my phone, and I turned around and I saw this man, Pastor Devin Turner, and he fell to his knees. You fell to your knees when you heard that guilty verdict being read. I just want you to take me back to that moment. What was going through your mind when you heard those words, guilty?
You know, Rachel, I felt elation, I felt joy, I felt peace, I felt relief. That God shined upon us and gave us justice, and that God spared us from an adverse reaction to this peaceful environment where music's.
Just be our community. And just because I'm black, they ain't gonna come for the call for that.
Say that again?
He is guilty of all 3 charges. What's the call for?
Justice for the rest of the family. Amen.
justice for the rest of the families. They need to reopen these cases and justice for the rest of these families. Because that's only one man's life. The rest of these 470, we want justice for them too.
And we want to up the charges for Dante Wright's killer
Yeah.
as well.
Yep.
The fact that her charge is less than the cop that killed Justine is ridiculous. She needs the same charge. It's murder. She killed him. It's only fair. What's fair is fair.
Yeah. And we're not going for that.
Deliberation.
We've been protesting out here all this time. They've been hitting us with rubber bullets. They've been hitting us with tear gas. They hit us with everything we got. And we kept on fighting. And we kept on fighting. And we kept on fighting. I saw you in yesterday. That's why I knew the party. That's why I knew the protest. I know. We got hundreds more to go. There's over 470 bodies in the state of Minnesota in the last 20 years that have led up to George Floyd. So that means we got over 470 more officers to go. We want them off the streets. We want them out of our communities. We want those officers that allowed Chauvin to die in that jail. We want them out of the jail. All of them that have no value for the black. Talk that. And yes. 32 years innocent. Talk that. Yes. All of the officers all of the officers that are involved with all of these hate crimes, because that's what they are. We got to call them out for what they are. These are hate crimes, and these are murders, and we got all these officers to go. I don't want you guys to just shout and scream for the ones that is the media. You shout and scream for every last one. Every last one. Every last one of our families deserve justice, and they killed a lot of people in Minnesota before George Floyd, and we want justice for them all. And we will not stop. I will not stop until we get justice for Ardell Chauvin, Justin Tiger, Cordell Andy, Marcus Golden, Kobe Eisler, Travis Jordan, Isaac Hayden, Jamar Cruz from Lando Castile, and Deliberation, and all right, we're known as in all stolen lives. We will not stop because it's too many more murders out here, and people blue and glow over the ones that they know about. But it's time to fight for everybody. It's time to fight for everybody, and we will not stop until we win. Families supporting families against police violence, and Community United Against Police Brutality. Minnesota Justice Coalition, Care Minnesota, be their voices. All of us are fighting together. Racial Justice Network. We're all fighting together, and we want you to fight for all of the rest of the stolen lives that are out here. Thank you. Nobody's missing, and none of us innocent men that got out.
Next, I'd like to go ahead and invite the President of the Minnesota Justice Coalition, Jonathan McClellan.
Our lives that have been stolen.
Minnesota, we're going to start a national movement.
Let's go.
We will start a national movement. They'll start here in Minneapolis, at Brooklyn Center, in Minnesota, and in America. Talk to us.
I told you! Guilty! Guilty! I'm gonna say it over and over again for the rest of the week. It feels good. One more time, one more time. Guilty! Guilty!
All right, all right. Hey, what's up? This is your girl Nicole Reloaded. Ooh, it is hot in here. It's hot in here. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? It don't want to unmute my mic. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? It's hot in here. Can you hear me? Ooh, child, it's hot. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. What we got here? Derek Chauvin charges. We got second-degree murder, unintentional killing while committing a felony. Hallelujah. Ooh, guilty, third-degree murder. Ooh, Lord Jesus, it's hot in here, child. It's hot. Ooh, third-degree murder. Ooh, dangerous acts. Invents in a depraved mind. Some of the words I can't say because I don't want, the video to get hit. Second degree order. Culpable negligence. Creating unreasonable risk. Guilty, guilty, guilty. The first time in history in Minneapolis, in the history, has a police officer has ever been found guilty on 3 charges like that. Let me turn on my air conditioner, child. It is hot. It's getting hot in here. Do you feel that justice has been served? Do you feel that there's more work to be done? I definitely know that there's more work that needs to be done. We need to unify in our communities and love on one another. Exhibit that behavior between each other. There's something in the minds of these officers that have been placed there for many, 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 many years that does something to their mind, that when they look at African American people, that we are a threat to them, like no other threat that they have ever seen. And I pray that God removes that fear from them. There's too many women and black men that have been taken away, matriarchs. Some things that I heard today were very devastating to my heart. No one deserves to pass away with the weight of a human being on their neck. I don't care what they have done. Only God should be the judge and executioner of life. Okay? Now let me set up this next clip and enjoy this break. Make sure that you thumbs up, like, share, and subscribe. We're going to go on as long as I feel like it. Whoever is here to support, I love you. I love you with all my heart. Black lives matter. All lives matter. Single mom lives matter. Subscriber lives matter. People that love chicken fingers lives matter. Dog lovers lives matter. But this air conditioner is gonna matter, and I'm gonna fall out. So I'll be right back, child. Make sure that you thumbs up, like, share, and subscribe. Be right back.
Yo, microphone check, make it a microphone check. Give it a microphone, I make it a microphone dead. Don't step to me, newbie, I could truly be moody. I could have played the fucking Grinch in the movies. I've been a part-time shadow cat, part-time. That is not a guy that I would ever want to try to battle rap. Snap, crackle, pop, mind fried to a crisp. Make an MC into a wide-eyed lunatic. You. El professor is in the house, let me teach you. I could defeat you with two hands tied and have you waking in the hospital like, who am I? And who are you? Who are they? What is this? You wouldn't believe how someone react to this shit. The mind slips, slipping, speaking in tongues. Sly ink, GVA, that's how we get it done. 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 Sly ink, GVA, that's how we get it done.
Okay, now I found the video. Okay, let's watch him. Watch him go back there to the. Go back there now. Let's keep watching him go back there like that.
We're adjourned.
Bye.
We're adjourned.
He should have been sent this one a knee to his damn neck. Now we got one down. Now we got 3 to go. So what's gonna happen to them? How many of y'all think some plea deals might be coming down? Okay, I bet you we'll be seeing some plea deals. 1 down, 3 to go. That's right. Okay.
I can't get that number out of my head because it was my time of birth on my birth certificate. I was born at 8:46 in the morning, and they killed this nigga in 8 minutes and 46 seconds. I watch everything everybody says. I think Candace Owens try to convince white America. Don't worry about it. He's a criminal anyway. I don't give a fuck what this nigga did. I don't care what this nigga did. I don't care if he personally kicked Candace Owens in her stinky pussy. I don't know if it stinks, but I imagine it does. If I ever find out, I'll let you know for sure. I'll tell like Azealia Banks, I'll tell. They saw a police officer kneel on a man's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. I can't get that number out of my head because it was my time of birth on my birth certificate. I was born at 8:46 in the morning, and they killed this nigga in 8 minutes and 46 seconds. I watch everything everybody says. I think Candace Owens try to convince white America. Don't worry about it. He's a criminal anyway. I don't give a fuck what this nigga did. I don't care what this nigga did. I don't care if he personally kicked Candace Owens in her stinky pussy. I don't know if it stinks, but I imagine it does. And if I ever find out, I'll let you know for sure. I'll tell like Azealia Banks, I'll tell. They saw a police officer kneel on a man's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. I can't get that number out of my head because it was my time of birth.
Dave Chappelle was going off. Look at him. What is so? Why are you smirking? Don't look too happy there. Hold on real quick.
Hey, what's up? This is your girl Nicole Reloaded, and we're locked and loaded with another video, and we are live. Oh yes, we are live, and we are on our way over to Twitter. There's been some trees throwing a shade on that black Twitter line. Oh yes, that's what we do, honey, over here with the Insomniacs, also known as So Ready for Love on Twitter. Follow me on all social media platforms. This is your YouTube content creator, vlogger, black news, stalking Twitter just for you. So tighten up, get on your tennis shoes, barefoot if you need, but it has increased and it has increased. We are locked and loaded. So follow me over to Twitter as I change the scene.
Verdict, count one. Court file number 27, CR 20-12646. We, the jury, in the above entitled manner as to count one, unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony, find the defendant guilty. Verdict, count one. Court file number 27, CR 20-12646. We, the jury, in the above entitled manner as to count one, unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony, find the defendant guilty. Verdict, count one. Court file number 27, CR 20-12646. We, the jury, in the above entitled manner as to count one, unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony, find the defendant guilty. Verdict, count one. Court file number 27, CR 20.
Ooh, praise God it was a guilty verdict, because if it was not, honey, it would have been a hot mess down there, child. Well, I'm praying for you, Emmanuel. I pray that God turn around whatever that you got going on, and that you be blessed financially, physically, spiritually, and mentally in every aspect of your life, baby. So what do you think about this guilty verdict? How do you feel about it?
We have to understand that the officers that were present during the murder of George Floyd, they were also complicit in that murder. There's things that they could have done to prevent that from occurring, like talk to their guy that has his knee on a man's neck. They could have done that. You know, it's like in the military we call it a battle buddy. If I'm like, if I'm anywhere, in a bar or club where my buddies is drunk, I pull his ass to the side and get him the fuck out of here so he does not do like more harm. Cops don't do that. I really don't understand how cops allow themselves to commit crimes in broad daylight in front of the American public. This arrogance. It was pride. You had the crowd there telling him to stop, and he didn't. Why? Because of pride. That's why. The cop killed that man because of his pride. He wasn't going to let anyone, especially another black person, tell him what to do in that moment, even though what that guy said was the most intelligent, most wise thing to do. It is. We're tired of these cops doing, like, just killing us because they simply want to, or because they're control freaks. We're tired of it.
What do you think will happen to the other 4 police officers that you mentioned?
I'll say making a positive assessment is premature, but I fear that they're going to be invisible. Like, folks are going to forget that there's other officers that were complicit in that murder. On top of the other officers who've murdered other Americans all across America thus far. So, I fear that those cops are going to end up being invisible, and I really do want them to see their day in court and be judged accordingly as well, because that one cop didn't do that by himself. He didn't.
No, he did not. He did not do it by himself. So what do we think is going to happen? What do we think is going to happen? Okay, this one right here, this is when they're taking him in the back. So this is a replay of that. Ooh, that looks oh my God. What is this? The verdict was not guilty when the U.S. police spent 20 minutes beating a homeless man to death on a video as he begged for his life. What makes Derek Chauvin trial so different? Oh, wow. The death of Kelly Thomas. Oh, wow. I'm going to have to look into that. Man. And that's a very gruesome picture, so I don't want to get flagged. I'll go back and check on that one. Oh, look at his beautiful baby girl. God bless her. She's so pretty. I hope this brings her some form of comfort, because she has to grow up without her dad. Yes. Emmanuel says, now we need justice for Breonna Taylor, Laquan McDonald, and other brothers and sisters who suffer injustice. Yes, we do. Yes. Yes. Let's see what's going on the news. What happened? What's going on now? What's that say, baby? I can't read it. Oh, that's the Senate. I screamed when I heard the verdict. I just was like, my God, praise God, like all the cases that I have followed and watched over the years, Casey Anthony, the OJ Simpson trial, so many different, uh, so many different trials. I didn't want to. I don't know. I just felt array of emotions within me. I didn't know, because you just, it's not that I didn't have faith. It's just, you just never know. You just never know. You just never know. Because our lives are looked at differently. And it just is what it is. And it just makes me feel good to see our people happy today. At least for now. Now, what was all of that about? Why is that man? What are they doing? Minneapolis tried to force open the windows and door on a truck that was blocked on the road. Why is that truck trying to go through? Why is that truck going through there like that? Why wasn't that area cut off? That wasn't smart for that dude to do that. People just do some of the darndest things. I don't know. Some people just do some of the darndest things. It just don't make no damn sense to me. I don't understand why were you on that? Like, I don't understand. What sense was that?
Always understand that we have to march. We will have to do this for life. We have to protest because it seems like this is a never-ending cycle. I'm gonna put up a fight every day because I'm not just fighting for George anymore. I'm fighting for everybody around this world. Justice for George means freedom for all.
All right. Some Minneapolis residents, there were no words for today's verdict, just tears.
Bipolar depression. And with this young man, there's another woman that has been, unfortunately, they said got shot in the face and in the stomach and all kinds of stuff. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so many killings you can't even keep up with it. It's like a slaughter in the streets. There's only 14% of African American of us. It's not that many of us. Let me see something. I'm trying to find. No, I'm not trying to do that.
And we give you the praise. Thank you. And God, we give you the glory. These blessings we ask in your name. Amen. Amen.
Okay. Hold on really quick. I'm going to share the screen. Audio. Chrome. This is where we're trying to go.
Let me say that I want to bring on now a man who has symbolized the fight for justice. He didn't seek the role, but he rose to the occasion. America, for many years, didn't have someone to stand for us. The last 4 years, we didn't have an Attorney General's office that would even hear our cry. But we had been raised to believe that God always has a ram in the bush. And God has a way of taking the most humble of people and raising them up. We had an Attorney General in Black America that has represented these cases with the acumen and skill of one that was raised in the South but came to claim this nation in a new direction. I bring you the Attorney General for Black America, Ben Crump. Yeah. I love it.
Thank you, Reverend Al Sharpton, not only for your mentorship, not only for being a great civil rights leader, but for being a moral authority.
Would even hear our cry. But we had been raised to believe that God always has a ram in the bush. And God has a...
And those
Obviously, we are not, but we're aware of what's going on, right? Because we're in the news. Everybody knows this verdict is coming in a matter.
Policing is inherently dangerous, and all of those things may factor into a trial like this. But what seemed to be the case here, and the prosecution really hammered it home in their closing statement, was an officer who didn't seem to regard this individual who'd been detained as a human. He was dismissive of him, callous to him, picking out the rocks from the tire as he had his knee on his back. And, honestly, a missed opportunity, I think, for the defense was that Derek Chauvin really never showed any emotion during this trial. I mean, he was masked for most of it, but we never saw anything that looked like regret from him. And I think the jurors probably saw him just sort of staring with a kind of flat affect throughout much of this trial. And maybe, again, that would have had some kind of reflection or inflection point for them as well. But I think there are some missed opportunities here, but I also think this was a very sort of singular case.
And we'll be able to put it in greater perspective in the coming minutes as we await that jury. All right, Paul, thank you very much. Let me bring in Mary Moriarty, a former chief public defender for Hennepin County, Minnesota. We thank you for being with us. Can you walk us through the process of how it will play out, the mechanics of the verdict, since you're obviously familiar with those courtrooms?
I can. The jury will be brought in when the judge is ready. And when they walk in, there will be one person who will have the jury verdict in their hand, and that's the person who will be the foreperson. And as a lawyer, you're always looking at that because you wonder who the foreperson will be. The judge will ask them if they have a verdict. The foreperson will say, we do. The judge's clerk will go get the verdict and hand it back to the judge. It can be the clerk, but it's probably going to be the judge who will actually read the verdict. And then the defense has the right to have the jury what is called polled. In other words, the judge will ask each individual juror if this is their true and correct verdict. He'll go down the line with numbers. They will all probably say yes. And then at that point, the judge has to make a decision if he's found guilty, if he's going to take Chauvin into custody because he is out on bail. On a presumptive prison case, he would be taken into custody. The state has asked for a sentence greater than the Minnesota sentencing guidelines, and so there will be Chauvin actually waived his right to have the jury make that decision about whether there are aggravating factors. He is allowing the judge to make that decision, but the judge has already said in a previous order that he will allow the lawyers to write memos on that issue to try to convince him what the appropriate sentence will be. So we won't see a sentencing today. That would probably be in a couple of weeks or however much time the judge gives the lawyers to write their memos.
All right. Thank you for that perspective, Mary. Eddie Glaude is an NBC News contributor and joins us now. Eddie, give us your reaction to this verdict.
In civil rights cases, and we've seen cases where juries haven't done the right thing. So Eddie Glaude earlier on this program talked about the importance of this moment as a moment in time where we can transform and do better. The message today is that this jury held this police officer accountable for what he did, and they did it the right way. The important challenge we face going forward is making sure that the system imparts this kind of justice in all of these cases, and ultimately that we make sure that these sort of incidents no longer happen. So it's a moment where we saw the jury system work, and I've been involved in the system for long enough to hope that it can also be a transformational moment.
All right, Joyce, thank you. Let's go to Cedric Alexander, NBC News law enforcement analyst. And Cedric, as we've noted before, the prosecution said they weren't putting police on trial. They were putting Derek Chauvin on trial. Nonetheless, we watched, everyone from a police chief to other officers testify against one of their former fellow officers. Have things changed now in terms of policing and how these cases are viewed?
The answer I would probably say no, probably not at this point. I think what we're seeing today is a specific case under a specific set of circumstances in which you have guilty verdicts. But here we have to keep in mind, Lester, that this work is just beginning across this country in terms of what has and will need to be done. Because even though people may have a relief, it is going to be a temporary relief. I think it's important for all of us to keep our foot on the gas and continue to move forward around what we want to reimagine policing, and even redefining what it is that we want police to do, which I think is pretty important. So this is just the beginning of a long process, and there has been, unfortunately, other George Floyds in the past in which people felt justice was not served. But however, we have a judicial system in this country, a judicial system, quite frankly, that works sometimes for some people. But what everyone in this country needs to feel is that there's a judicial system that works for everyone based on the evidence. This particular case, quite frankly, was clear-cut. Millions of people across this country, around the world, saw that murder take place in front of them. What is going to be more challenging for us as a nation and for policing and the criminal justice system at large is that for the cases that are still unresolved, the more recent cases that's going to be in front of us, how are we going to deal with them? Are we going to use the same level of competence in our judicial system and ask that people be unbiased in their decision and deal with the facts of case and not be partial towards anyone? We all understand that policing is a very tough job, and we support police in this country, and we need to continue to support them because people will be calling them tonight. But what is also important is that for all of us in this country to recognize that police and community must come together if we're going to resolve the issues of the past and make sure that we don't have future George Floyds and we don't have police officers that are sent off to prison because of behaviors that's unbecoming of any police officer in this country. We got a lot of good cops out there.
All right, Cedric, thank you. As we watch the crowds now continue to mill outside the courtroom, taking in what's just happened. Again, the 3 guilty verdicts, guilty on all counts against Derek Chauvin, second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter, immediately taken into custody while he awaits sentencing 8 weeks from now. The crowd largely constrained, subdued in many ways, and certainly showing a sense of relief and satisfaction that the system worked, in their opinion, in this case. All hoping, of course, that this will be a peaceful evening ahead as this verdict is absorbed, and this city that has been so emotionally wrenched over the last year begins to find its footing amid all this. And here's a picture outside the scene. I guess we can call it the crime scene now. This is where George Floyd took his last breaths, on this corner under the knee of former officer Derek Chauvin. We saw many pictures of many angles of this intersection, both police body cams, a security camera across the street, even cameras from the convenience store across the street where George Floyd had visited before his fatal encounter with police. There's a memorial at this site that has been ongoing since after his death, and you can see now people arriving at the scene to pay their respects and to remember all of what happened and what has just happened in all of this. Let me go to NBC correspondent Megan Fitzgerald. Megan, before we go to you, I understand we had pictures, we had some sound actually from George Floyd's brother reacting to this. Do we have that?
We're here in the family room, and we're going to have a press conference soon. But we just broke down in tears because, all of the work and paid down through the years, all the families, Breonna Taylor's boyfriend is here, and we're going to talk later. But Rodney Floyd, his brother's here. Philonis is on his way from the courthouse. It's a monumental win, but it's only a round. The war's not over. We've got a funeral in 2 days. We've got Eric Garner that never got this. We've got Breonna Taylor never got this. But God brought us through, and the first thing we're going to do with the press conference is have prayer and thank God. Rodney, just tell them how you felt. I know you were crying like I was crying.
Yes, I mean, I'm feeling tears of joy, so emotional that no family in history ever got this far. We was able to get a guilty charge on all accounts. We got a chance to go to trial, and they took it all away. So this right here is for everyone that been in this situation, everybody. We are here. We stand in a unit. Thank you, Brother Sharpton, for being right here with us from the very first day until the last. I know we're not done yet. I love it.
God bless you.
That's Rodney Floyd along with Reverend Al Sharpton. His first reaction after that guilty verdict delivered by a Minneapolis jury today, as we again look at the scene. The crowd gathered at that scene where George Floyd took his final breaths. NBC correspondent Megan Fitzgerald is back in downtown Minneapolis for us, giving us a sense of the scene there. Megan?
Yeah, Lester, just seeing those moments there, Rodney Floyd reacting to this verdict, like I was saying, I had a chance to speak with the family yesterday, and they said this is what they've been praying for. And when you really just break it down and think about it, they had to relive the moment that their brother, as they say, was just executed in the street. So this is incredibly traumatic for the family. And then I also talked to them a little bit about the trauma that was felt throughout the country, and they understood that. They understood that this case here was very personal, deeply personal for the entire country, and we see that with the protests that have broken out all across the country of people of all races and nationalities. And so just behind me here, down below, we can hear the honking, we can hear the chants of justice. George Floyd, the crowd has said on several occasions. There is a sense of relief here, and we've been reporting about the tension, about the buildings that have been boarded up, about the anxiety that was mounting in this town as they were awaiting for this verdict. So it's certainly a sigh of relief. It's a moment of hope. I've been texting with people that we met yesterday, many protesters who say a weight has been lifted off of their shoulders. They feel more optimistic that the country is heading in the right direction, that a black person killed at the hands of law enforcement has an opportunity to get justice. And so a lot of hopeful feelings here, Lester, with protesters that are on the ground.
Megan, thank you. As we continue to see the different shots of folks now waving flags and reacting to the verdict, I want to go right now to U.S. Senator from Minnesota, Democrat Amy Klobuchar, who joins us. Senator, thank you for taking the time to join us. Can you give us your reaction to this verdict?
Just seeing Rodney Floyd said it all. That family never gave up, and they know that this verdict will never bring back George, but what they know it is a first step to accountability. And I also wanted to acknowledge, you'll soon hear from him, Keith Ellison, our Attorney General, his team. They didn't make the story about them in bringing this case. They made it about George. They made it about the witness, the everyday people that just happened to be there, that carried this burden with them for a year, the police officers that were willing to testify and take on Derek Chauvin. This is their day, and this is the day Floyd.
What does this do for trust in the criminal justice system? You heard just a moment ago, Reverend Al, and others have talked about the cases that have not been solved. Breonna Taylor, no one was held in account for her death, and that list goes on and on. What should the takeaway be, at least from this case, in terms of the criminal justice system?
Lester, this is the call for action. This jury did the right thing here. But there's so many cases across the country, and to me, the Senate can't wait anymore. We have to pass police reform, the GeorgeFloyd bill. We have to pass police reform and ban chokeholds, and there are so many things that we could do. And Senator Booker is leading this effort in the Senate and doing an incredible job. And I hope my colleagues see this as a beginning and not an end. It's the beginning.
Senator, great to talk to you. We see the prosecution team here. Mr. Ellison, who you noted, is here as well. So let's listen in.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's actually more room on this side.
There's more room on this side?
Yeah, more room to your right.
Can we see everybody?
Yes, thank you. That's much better.
So Natasha, people got to be able to see the baby too. So.
Especially after the baby ran here, right?
Yeah.
Baby on board.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Keith Ellison. I'm the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota. And since the investigation and prosecution of this case began last May, everyone involved has pursued one goal: justice. We pursued justice wherever it led. When I became the lead prosecutor for the case, I asked for time and patience to review the facts, gather evidence, and prosecute for the murder of George Floyd to the fullest extent the law allowed. I want to thank the community for giving us that time and allowing us to do our work. That long, hard, painstaking work has culminated today. I would not call today's verdict justice, however, because justice implies true restoration. But it is accountability, which is the first step towards justice. And now the cause of justice is in your hands. And when I say your hands, I mean the hands of the people of the United States. George Floyd mattered. He was loved by his family and his friends. His death shocked the conscience of our community, our country, the whole world. He was loved by his family and friends. But that isn't why he mattered. He mattered because he was a human being. And there is no way we can turn away from that reality. The people who stopped and raised their voices on May 25th, 2020, were a bouquet of humanity, a phrase I stole from my friend Jerry Blackwell. A bouquet of humanity, old, young, men and women, black and white, a man from the neighborhood just walking to get a drink, a child going to buy a snack with her cousin, an off-duty firefighter on her way to a community garden, brave young women, teenagers, who press record on their cell phones. Why did they stop? They didn't know George Floyd. They didn't know he had a beautiful family. They didn't know he had been a great athlete. And they didn't know he was a proud father, or that he had people in his life who loved him. They stopped and raised their voices, and they even challenged authority because they saw his humanity. They stopped and they raised their voices because they knew that what they were seeing was wrong. They didn't need to be medical professionals or experts in the use of force. They knew it was wrong, and they were right. These community members, this bouquet of humanity, did it again in this trial. They performed simple yet profound acts of courage. They told the truth, and they told the whole world the truth about what they saw. They were vindicated by the chief of police, by Minneapolis' longest serving police officer, and by many other police officers who stepped up and testified as to what they saw and to what they knew. What happened on that street was wrong. We owe it, and we owe our gratitude to we owe them our gratitude for fulfilling their civic duty and for their courage in telling the truth. To countless people in Minnesota and across the United States who join them in peacefully demanding justice for George Floyd, we say, all of us, thank you. In the coming days, more may seek to express themselves again through petition and demonstration. I urge everyone to honor the legacy of George Floyd by doing so calmly, legally, and peacefully. I urge everyone to continue the journey to transformation and justice. It's in your hands now. I also want to address the Floyd family, if I may. Over the last year, the family of George Floyd had to relive again and again the worst day of their lives when they lost their brother, their father, their friend. I'm profoundly grateful to them for giving us the time we needed to prosecute this case. They have shown the world what grace and class and courage really look like. Although a verdict alone cannot end their pain, I hope it's another step on the long path toward healing for them. There's no replacing your beloved Perry, or Floyd, as his friends called him, but he is the one who sparked a worldwide movement, and that's important. We owe our thanks to the men and women of the jury who gave many hours of their time and attention to carefully listening to the evidence, weighing the facts, rendering a verdict. They are regular people from all walks of life, a lot like that bouquet of humanity on that corner on May 25th and in that courtroom. They answered the call, and they served in a landmark trial. They now deserve to return to their lives. If they ask you to respect their privacy, we ask you to honor that request. I want to acknowledge the remarkable team that helped us prosecute the case. We put everything we had into this prosecution. We presented the best case that we could, and the jury heard us, and we're grateful for that. We had the sole burden of proof in the case, and history shows that winning cases like these can be difficult. I'm proud of every hour, every minute, and every ounce of effort we put in this case. And let me tell you, we spent many hours working on this case, did we not? We, week after week, committee meeting after committee meeting, this team never let up and it never quit. We fought every day, and we did it together. The Attorney General's office together with the Hennepin County Attorney's office. Thank you, sir. And we did it together. I'm deeply grateful to everyone who worked on the case. Most of these folks will tell you it's a bad idea to put together a team of all Michael Jordans. Nobody would want to pass the ball. This team, that was their true strength, is sharing the load, passing the ball, understanding that all of us together are smarter than any one of us alone. And that worked. Although the verdict has been rendered, this is not the end. In the coming weeks, the court will determine sentencing, and later this summer, we expect to present another case. We will not be talking about that. This verdict reminds us how hard it is to make enduring change. And I just want to finish by sharing some important historical legacy, if you allow me. In 1968, the Kerner Commission was formed to investigate the causes of uprisings across major American cities. And a man named Dr. Kenneth Clark, a famous African-American psychologist who, along with his equally accomplished psychologist wife, Mamie, contributed to compelling research in the Brown versus Board of Education case. And Dr. Clark testified at the Kerner Commission. And I want to quote you what he said. I read that report, the one in the 1919 riot in Chicago, and it was as if I were reading the report of investigating the committee of the Harlem riot in 1935, the report on investigating the Harlem riot in 1943, and the report of the McCone Commission on the Watts riot. I must say again in candor to you, the members of this commission, it's like a kind of an Alice in Wonderland with the same moving picture reshown over and over again, the same analysis, the same recommendation, and the same inaction. Those are the words of Dr. Clark in 1968. Here we are in 2021. Here we are in 2021, still addressing the same problem. Since Dr. Clark testified, we have seen Rodney King, Abner Louima, Oscar Grant, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Freddie Gray, Sandra Bland, Philando Castile, Laquan McDonald, Stephon Clark, Atiana Jefferson, Anton Black, Breonna Taylor, and now Dante Wright and Adam Toledo. This has to end. We need true justice. That's not one case. That is a social transformation that says that nobody's beneath the law and no one is above it. This verdict reminds us that we must make enduring systemic societal change. More than a month ago, months before George Floyd was murdered, the Minnesota Public Safety Commissioner John Harrington and I released the recommendations of our working group on reducing deadly force encounters with law enforcement. What all of us in that working group, including law enforcement, wanted is for everyone to go home safe. Anytime someone doesn't, everyone's lives are changed forever. We need to use this verdict as an inflection point. What if we just prevented the problem instead of having to try these cases? We don't want any more community members dying at the hands of law enforcement and their families' lives ruined. We don't want any more law enforcement members having to face criminal charges and their families' lives ruined. We don't want any more communities torn apart. One way to prevent this is to get into a new relationship where we as a society re-examine the use of force and our old settled assumptions. I'm so proud of Chief Arredondo and the Minneapolis police officers who by their testimony said enough is enough. And another way to prevent it is by acknowledging and lifting up everyone's humanity, helping communities heal, and officers be well. Another way to prevent it is with accountability. Passing laws and instituting policies and training is important, but they must be more than words on paper, and there must be accountability for violating them. With this verdict, we have brought some accountability. Finally, this verdict demands us to never give up the hope that we can make enduring change. Generations of people said slavery would never end. Generations said Jim Crow would never end. Generations said women would never be equal to men. Generations said if you were different in any way, you could never be a full and equal member of our society. Today, we have to end this travesty of recurring, enduring deaths at the hands of law enforcement. Those beliefs are things we have to focus our attention on. And as I now do close, I just want to say to you, the work of our generation is to put unaccountable law enforcement behind us. It's time to transform the relationship between community and the people who are sworn to protect them from one that is mistrustful, suspicious, and in some cases terrifying, into one that is empathetic, compassionate, and affirming. That will benefit everyone, including police officers who deserve to serve in a profession that is honored, in departments where they don't have to worry about colleagues who don't follow the rules. Now that work is in your hands. The work of our generation is to put an end to the vestiges of Jim Crow and the centuries of trauma, and finally put an end to racism. We can end it. It doesn't have to be with us into the future if we decide now to have true liberty and justice for all. The work of our generation is to say goodbye to old practices that don't serve us anymore and to put them all behind us. One conviction, even one like this one can create a powerful new opening to shed old practices and reset relationships. So with that, I just want to say that I do hope that people step forward and understand that nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. You can do something the way like everyday people like Donald Williams and Genevieve Hanson and Christopher Martin and Charles McMillan and all those teenagers and young people stepped up and did something. You can do things like help pass the George Floyd Justice and Accountability Act. It's in your hands. Let's get the work done. And now I'd like to invite my friend and partner in justice, Michael Freeman, Hennepin County Attorney.
We've been listening to Keith Ellison. He's the Minnesota Attorney General, along with standing there along with the prosecution team, reflecting on today's guilty verdict on all 3 counts against former officer Derek Chauvin. As we look at these live pictures of the area near the courthouse, people who are reacting to and expressing relief, and appears some celebration now in the verdict that occurred there today. Let me go to Gabe Gutierrez right now, who's in the crowd. Gabe, are we hearing any more of the color from inside the courthouse, things that we couldn't see during the delivery of the verdict?
Well, Lester, before I get to that, let me, you talked about some celebration. Celebration certainly an understatement. Give me a sense for what we're in the house right now. You can see this crowd is really come here into the street. There are people honking their horns, cars honking their horns. Every few moments, people erupt in cheers. They, are talking about how, people literally dancing in the streets behind me. And this is, as I said earlier, Lester, this is
justice.
As I said earlier, Lester, there's a huge there's a huge sense of relief here, Lester. There was a lot of anxiety building up to this moment, but as you can clearly see, people have been coming here, and really people that hadn't even been demonstrating before wanted to come out once they heard the verdict. And ma'am, were you here when the verdict was read?
Yes, I was here when the verdict was read.
What went through your head?
I was just very nervous. All the emotions just came out at once, and the second they said guilty, take to the streets, because it was just a beautiful moment when we finally get to see somebody get at least an inch of justice. But we know this is just the beginning, and we're about to go out there to Brooklyn Center and fight for Dante Wright, because this isn't over. This is just one name. We have so many more names, so many more people that we got to get justice. And so we're all here to just make sure that we can actually get that justice.
Well, the last few moments, madam, I've been speaking with people who thought they never believed this moment would come. They thought during this, leading up to this, they were just concerned. They were worried about what this trial might lead to. Did you sense that? Did you think that the verdict would end up the way it did?
I honestly wasn't sure. I was hoping that it would be a guilty verdict, but I was 11 years old when Trayvon Martin was murdered, and he didn't get justice. I grew up seeing my people not get justice, and so I was scared it was just going to be the same story over and over. So for us to finally have our first victory, it's crazy, and I just want to make sure that I'm here to get more and more of these victories.
Ma'am, thank you so much. What's your name?
I'm Frances Wallace.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for speaking with us. Lester, something we're hearing over and over again. A short time ago, one of George Floyd's family member, I believe it was Rodney Floyd, said that he was filled with tears of joy. We're hearing that the president also called the Floyd family a short time ago. Lester, after covering these protests, there was such a sense of frustration and this outrage that had been building here. That is not the sentiment I'm getting right now. This is, if not an all-out celebration, again, what I said earlier, just a sense of relief.
Gabe Gutierrez there outside with the crowd in Minnesota. And
back to you, Lester.
Thank you. And Gabe mentioned that call from the president to George Floyd's family. I believe we have some video of it, of the family all listening in on the speakerphone as the president spoke to them and reacted to the verdict.
Right here. Hello. Hello. Hey, how you doing?
How's Gianna doing?
feeling better now. Nothing is going to make it all better, but at least God, now there's some justice. Right. And you know, I think a John is coming. My daddy's going to change the world. He's going to start to change it now.
That's right. Yes. Amen.
Start to change it now. You've been incredible. You're an incredible family. I wish I were there just with my arms around you. I'm standing here with Cedric. We've been talking. We've been watching every second of this, and the Vice President, all of us, and we're all so relieved. Not just in one verdict, but all three. Truly on all three counts. And it's really important. I'm anxious to see you guys. I really am. And we're going to get a lot more done. We're going to get police. We're going to do a lot. We're going to stay at it till we get it done.
Hopefully this is the momentum for the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act to get passed and have you sign.
Got it, pal. That and a lot more. Not just that, but a lot more.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Well, this could be our first shot at dealing with genuine systemic racism. Look, there's two people here that feel strongly as I do. The Vice President, she wants to say something.
Okay.
I'm just so thankful to the entire family. Your courage, your commitment, your strength has been a strength for so many people and this is a day of justice in America. And your family and is going to show real leaders at this moment where we needed you. And in George's name and memory, we are going to make sure his legacy is intact. And history will look back at this moment and know that it was an inflection moment. You had to sacrifice so much, your family did too. But we really do believe that with your leadership and the president that we have in the White House, that we're going to make something good come out of this tragedy, okay?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you, Madam Vice President.
And you better all get ready, because when we do it, we're going to put you on Air Force One and get you here.
We're going to hold you to that, President Biden.
Jesus. I guarantee it.
Thank you, Mr. President.
What I'm most concerned about, Gianna.
She's okay. I'm going to go tell her in a few.
My wife Jill's with me too.
Thank you.
Hello,
Thank you.
We're thinking about you. We're watching every minute of it. So, had a good ending, but it has a positive ending. Things are very good.
Nothing was worth it, but like I said, I keep thinking of her words. Daddy's going to change the world.
Yeah, change the world. Thank God.
Well, we got a shot to make change the world.
That's right.
For a reason.
Yeah, big change.
You tell her what I said. Remind her. She's president. She
Tell them we're going to personally give up that receipt.
I will.
Let them know we're going to give up that receipt. Yeah. She's coming to see you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Thank you, Mr. President. God bless you.
Rather lengthy conversation there between President Biden, also Vice President Harris speaking to the family, reacting with satisfaction at today's guilty verdicts against Derek Chauvin. Let's go to Kristen Welker right now at the White House. And Kristen, this is likely not the last we are going to see or hear from the president this evening.
That's right, Lester. Preparations are underway for President Biden and Vice President Harris to speak.
Any of your questions, I want to acknowledge a great lawyer from Chicago, Illinois, one of the best I've ever had a chance to work with, Attorney Tony Romanucci. I want to recognize my partner on the front line in this case, one of the best lawyers at being on them. He hails from Atlanta, Georgia, Attorney Chris Stewart. His law partner, Attorney Justin Miller. Attorney Madeline Simmons. A great Minnesota lawyers, Attorney Jeff Storms, raise your hand, Jeff. Attorney Michelle Godot, and who else we got here? Anybody else?
Attorney.
We have Attorney Scott Masterson, who's not present. Attorney Bhavani.
Just describe what it's like there right now. I see folks behind you, people moving about, something we have not seen to date.
Yeah, Allison, you and I have been talking about this over the last several weeks, and we've talked about just the tension that you could feel in the air here, the anxiety, a city that was really on edge. Today, it's the complete opposite. There's a sense of relief. I've been texting and communicating with many of the protesters who marched the streets yesterday after jurors started deliberating, and they said that it was like a weight had been lifted off of their shoulders. This is one step on the path of justice. So as you mentioned behind me here,
up knowing that they can lose their very life in the course of just living their life.
Isn't the same as equal justice. This verdict brings us a step closer, and the fact is, we still have work to do. We still must reform the system. Last summer, together with Senator Cory Booker and Representative Karen Bass, I introduced the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. This bill would hold law enforcement accountable and help build trust between law enforcement and our communities. This bill is part of George Floyd's legacy. The President and I will continue to urge the Senate to pass this legislation, not as a panacea for every problem, but as a start. This work is long overdue. America has a long history of systemic racism. Black Americans, and Black men in particular, have been treated throughout the course of our history as less than human. Black men are fathers and brothers and sons and uncles and grandfathers and friends and neighbors. Their lives must be valued in our education system, in our healthcare system, in our housing system, in our economic system, in our criminal justice system, in our nation. Full stop. Because of smartphones, so many Americans have now seen the racial injustice that Black Americans have known for generations. The racial injustice that we have fought for generations, that my parents protested in the 1960s, that millions of us, Americans of every race, protested last summer. Here's the truth about racial injustice. It is not just a Black America problem or a people of color problem. It is a problem for every American. It is keeping us from fulfilling the promise of liberty and justice for all. And it is holding our nation back from realizing our full potential. We are all a part of George Floyd's legacy, and our job now is to honor it and to honor him. Thank you. And now it is my great honor to introduce the President of the United States, Joe Biden.
Today, a jury in Minnesota found former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin guilty on all counts in the murder of George Floyd last May. It was a murder in the full light of day, and it ripped the blinders off for the whole world to see the systemic racism the Vice President just referred to. The systemic racism is a stain on our nation's soul. The knee on the neck of justice for Black Americans. Profound fear and trauma. The pain, the exhaustion that Black and brown Americans experience every single day. The murder of George Floyd launched a summer of protest we hadn't seen since the civil rights era in the 60s. Protests that unified people of every race and generation in peace and with purpose to say enough, enough, enough of this senseless killings. Today's verdict is a step forward. I just spoke with the governor of Minnesota, who thanked me for the close work with his team. And I also spoke with George Floyd's family again. A remarkable family of extraordinary courage. Nothing can ever bring their brother, their father back. But this can be a giant step forward in the march toward justice in America. Let's also be clear that such a verdict is also much too rare. For so many people, it seems like it took a unique and extraordinary convergence of factors. A brave young woman with a smartphone camera, a crowd that was traumatized witnesses, a murder that lasts almost 10 minutes in broad daylight for ultimately the whole world to see. Officers standing up and testifying against a fellow officer instead of just closing ranks, which should be commended. A jury who heard the evidence, carried out their civic duty in the midst of an extraordinary moment, under extraordinary pressure. For so many, it feels like it took all of that for the judicial system to deliver a just basic accountability. We saw how traumatic and exhausting just watching the trial was for so many people. Think about it, those of you who are listening. Think about how traumatic it was for you. You weren't there. You didn't know any of the people. But it was difficult, especially for the witnesses who had to relive that day. It's a trauma. On top of the fear so many people of color live with every day when they go to sleep at night and pray for the safety of themselves and their loved ones. Again, as we saw in this trial from the fellow police officers who testified, most men and women who wear the badge serve their communities honorably. But those few who fail to meet that standard must be held accountable, and they were today. One was. No one should be above the law. And today's verdict sends that message. But it's not enough. We can't stop here. In order to deliver real change and reform, we can and we must do more to reduce the likelihood that tragedies like this will ever happen and occur again. To ensure that Black and brown people, or anyone, so they don't fear the interactions with law enforcement, that they don't have to wake up knowing that they can lose their very life in the course of just living their life. They don't have to worry about whether their sons or daughters will come home after a grocery store run, or just walking down the street, or driving their car, or playing in the park, or just sleeping at home. And this takes acknowledging and confronting head-on systemic racism and the racial disparities that exist in policing and in our criminal justice system more broadly. You know, state and local government and law enforcement needs to step up, but so does the federal government. That's why I've appointed the leadership of the Justice Department that I have, that is fully committed to restoring trust between law enforcement and the community they are sworn to serve and protect. I have complete confidence in the Attorney General, General Garland's leadership and commitment. I've also nominated 2 key Justice Department nominees, Vanita Gupta and Kristen Clark, who are eminently qualified, highly respected lawyers who have spent their entire careers fighting to advance racial equity and justice. Vanita and Kristen have the experience and the skill necessary to advance our administration's priorities to root out unconstitutional policing and reform our criminal justice system, and they deserve to be confirmed. We also need Congress to act. George Floyd was murdered almost a year ago. There's meaningful police reform legislation in his name. You just heard the Vice President speak of it. She helped write it. Legislation to tackle systemic misconduct in police departments, to restore trust between law enforcement and the people they're entrusted to serve and protect. But it shouldn't take a whole year to get this done. In my conversations with the Floyd family, I spoke with them again today, I assure them we're going to continue to fight for the passage of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act so I can sign into law as quickly as possible. There's more to do. Finally, it's the work we do every day to change hearts and minds as well as laws and policies. That's the work we have to do. Only then will full justice and full equality be delivered to all Americans. And that's what I just discussed with the Floyd family. The guilty verdict does not bring back George. But through the family's pain, they're finding purpose. So George's legacy will not be just about his death, but about what we must do in his memory. I also spoke to Gianna, George's young daughter again. When I met her last year, I've said this before, at George's funeral, I told her how brave I thought she was. And I sort of knelt down to hold her hand. I said, Daddy's looking down on you. He's so proud. She said to me then, I'll never forget it, Daddy changed the world. Well, I told her this afternoon, Daddy did change the world. Let that be his legacy, a legacy of peace, not violence, of justice. Peaceful expression of that legacy are inevitable and appropriate, but violent protest is not. And there are those who will seek to exploit the raw emotions of the moment, agitators and extremists who have no interest in social justice, who seek to carry out violence, destroy property, fan the flames of hate and division, who will do everything in their power to stop this country's march toward racial justice. We can't let them succeed. This is a time for this country to come together, to unite as Americans. There can never be any safe harbor for hate in America. I've said it many times. The battle for soul of this nation has been a constant push and pull for more than 240 years. A tug of war between the American ideal that we're all created equal and the harsh reality that racism has long torn us apart. At our best, the American ideal wins out. So we can't leave this moment or look away thinking our work is done. We have to look at it, we have to look as we did for those 9 minutes and 29 seconds. We have to listen. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. Those were George Floyd's last words. We can't let those words die with him. We have to keep hearing those words. We must not turn away. We can't turn away. We have a chance to begin to change the trajectory in this country. It's my hope and prayer that we live up to the legacy. May God bless you, and may God bless George Floyd and his family. Thank you for taking the time to be here. This can be a moment of significant change. Thank you.
President Biden, Vice President Harris expressing their satisfaction with today's verdict, guilty in all 3 counts against Derek Chauvin for the death of George Floyd. The president talking further about systemic racism and learning from this moment and not forgetting the moment, or the words of George Floyd, "I can't breathe." We're going to send you back to your regular programming. For some of you, that may be nightly news. I'm Lester Holt, NBC News, New York. Good evening.
All righty. Well, that was it. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you, Periscope, for hanging out with me. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I really appreciate it. This is your girl, Nicole Reloaded. Unfortunately, I was having a little bit of some technical difficulties, but you know how we do, how we do, how we do. We don't give up. We keep fighting for justice and trying to get the word out, okay? We focus not on the numbers, but about the importance of getting the word out. Because all it takes is a few of us to spread it to someone else, and they can spread it to somebody else and carry the message on. So just remember, through God, all things are possible to those who believe, as long as you're willing to receive what God has for you, you know? So let me go ahead and play a couple of my little funny little things for you, and we'll get on out of here. We'll get on out of here. All right. Okay. Okay. We didn't give up, did we? We fought. A lot of us fought and we prayed.
I've been getting calls all day and text messages from people telling me I need to stop, so I need to disassociate myself, or else my career is going to be over, or else my life is going to be over. Let me tell y'all something. Stop calling me. Stop texting me. I turned my back on a man. You think I'm about to turn my back? I don't think I'm going to turn my back on a lot of stuff for the black community, who made the black community great again? And you think I'm about to give up on you? Are you stupid? You think I'm about to turn my back? It's not happening. It's not happening, Captain. Stop calling me. Stop texting me. I stand with me to disassociate myself. For what? For what? If you want me to give up on, go to hell, you ungrateful pieces of shit. Yeah, I said that.
Hey, Queen. Girl, you have done it again. Constantly raising the bar for us all and doing it flawlessly. I'd say I'm surprised, but I know who you are. I've seen it up close and personal. Girl, you make me so proud, and I love you.
Bye. Ow,